My husband found himself a slimmer mistress after I gained weight, but what he didn't know is that, for years, I took care of everything. The house, the kids, him, and when the weight of routine started leaving marks on my body, he simply replaced me with someone younger, lighter, easier to show off in front of others. But what he never knew is that, while he was chasing pleasure out there, I was fighting the toughest battle of my life, alone. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about silence, abandonment, and rebirth, because in the end, the one who looked weak was the one who stood strongest. Some things you only understand when you feel them in your own skin. And gaining weight, for me, was more than a physical change. It was becoming a display. In a small town, where everyone knows everyone, every extra pound becomes a topic. It doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter the context. Judgment comes before the question. Around here, the local diner gossips louder than the radio, and the beauty salon cuts deeper than any knife. It's as if everyone has the right to look, comment, point. And when you're a woman, married, a mother, that gaze weighs even more. I married Elias when I was 23. At the time, he was the kind of man who stood out for being quiet, helpful, the type who never raised his voice, even when he was right. I used to find that beautiful. We built a simple life, but a safe one. 2 kids, a backyard with a mango tree, bills we barely managed, but managed. I juggled the county clerk's office and house chores, and still found time to take my mother-in-law to her doctor's appointments. It wasn't glamorous, but it was love, or at least, I believed it was. The years came heavy. My body changed, first with the pregnancies, then with exhaustion. I tried to hide it under loose clothes, weekend makeup, but the mirror doesn't lie. Neither do people. It started subtly. A neighbor saying I was looking fuller, a coworker offering me a diet shake without me asking, my sister-in-law tagging me in fitness recipe videos like she was sending a message. I laughed it off on the outside. Inside, it stung. There was one Saturday at the farmer's market that I'll never forget. I overheard 2 women talking. They spoke about me as if I were a character on TV, not someone with flesh, feelings, and a name. She used to be so pretty when she got married. Remember? I stopped at the orange stall, pretending to pick slowly, but my heart was being squeezed like fruit in a juicer. I was still pretty, just now hidden under dark circles, accumulated fatigue, a belly full of stories no one wanted to hear. But the worst part wasn't the town, it was Elias. He never called me fat, never raised his voice, but he went silent, stopped looking at me when I changed clothes, stopped reaching for me in bed. Kisses became protocol, like saying good morning to a stranger. I started feeling cold even on warm nights, the kind of cold that comes from inside, when the one who should warm you drifts away without a word. I thought it was just a phase, that he was stressed. I blamed myself, thought, maybe I should try to lose weight. But what was missing between us wasn't weight, it was presence. There was one night in particular I'll never forget. He came home from work, dropped his bag in the corner, looked at me and said flat, "You don't go to the gym anymore?" I gave a weak laugh and answered, "Can't even remember what it's like to have time for that." He shrugged, opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, didn't say anything else. No, good night. No, how was your day? That question stayed stuck in my throat like a thorn. It wasn't about the gym. It was about everything he wasn't saying, but thought. The cruelest part was realizing I had also started abandoning myself. I looked at old photos, and didn't just see a different body. I saw a woman with light in her eyes, something that now only appeared when I talked about the kids. Elias said he loved me, but love that doesn't touch, that doesn't look, that doesn't ask, is just a memory. I felt invisible in my own home, and invisibility is a slow death. Nobody screams when they feel forgotten. You just start becoming smaller, quieter, dimmer. I clung to the routine like someone holding onto a tree branch during a flood. I made coffee, did the laundry, paid the bills, helped the kids with homework, all on autopilot. The town kept watching me, and I kept trying not to fall apart, because a woman who breaks down here gets more than gossip. She gets contempt, and I wasn't ready to be despised, at least not by everyone at once. In a town like mine, gaining weight isn't just a physical detail. It's like you stop being a woman and become a statistic, a victim of letting herself go, a poor thing or a mess. No one asks if you're sleeping well, if you eat from anxiety, if you live in pain, body or soul. They only see the extra curves, the rounder face, the clothes that don't fit. And judgment comes long before empathy. But what nobody knew was that my body had been screaming long before I gained weight. What no one saw was that, beneath the pounds, there was a woman trying to hold up an entire life in her arms. And maybe that was the heaviest part of all. Love doesn't end all at once. It fades slowly, like embers dying out without a sound. That's exactly how it happened between me and Elias. No fights, no slammed doors, no dramatic scenes, just a silence that grew heavier by the day. First, he stopped talking about work. Then, he stopped asking how my day was. His texts became cold, practical notes. Buy bread, pay the electric bill, take the car to the shop. I read those words like someone watching the final scene of a movie they already know by heart. I started noticing how dinner had turned into parallel meals. He ate in silence, eyes glued to his phone, sometimes not even acknowledging what I had made. Even when I tried a little harder, spiced the food better, made his favorite dessert, wore that old blouse he used to love, nothing changed. He chewed like it was just fuel, without compliments or complaints. And I sat across the table pretending it didn't hurt. Pretending, actually, had become routine. Pretending everything was fine, that it was just a phase, that long marriages are supposed to be like this. The nights turned cold, not because of the weather, but because of the space growing between us in bed. He'd turn his back to me. Sometimes he'd even pull the blanket away without realizing he left me uncovered. I curled up facing the wall, trying to convince myself it was just temporary, just a phase. I repeated that like a mantra, but the phase became a week, then a month, and what began as absence turned into habit. We started sharing the same roof like two roommates who had forgotten what once connected them. All that was left was routine and silence. I started wondering when exactly he stopped seeing me, because it wasn't just my body he ignored. It was my voice, my thoughts, the little joys I tried to share. I'd show him an old picture of the kids, and he'd smile without looking up from his phone. I'd mention a funny memory from years ago, and he'd give a dry, and go back to watching soccer. It was like my presence had turned into background noise, and I, who was always quiet, felt completely invisible. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just weighs. And this was the worst kind. The pain of realizing love didn't vanish. It simply got buried under layers of indifference. There was no obvious betrayal, no shouting match, just absence. And when absence settles in, it doesn't need words. It invades everything. Food loses flavor. Laughter loses meaning. Hope turns into an old habit, like a picture frame collecting dust on the wall. I blamed myself. Maybe I had stopped being interesting. Maybe I had let myself go. Maybe it really was the weight, the dark circles, the tiredness. I spent hours looking in the mirror, pulling at the skin on my face, trying to remember the last time he called me beautiful. I couldn't, but I did remember the last time I felt loved, and it had been a long time, too long. At the clerk's office, some coworkers noticed my silence. A few asked if I was okay. I smiled and said yes. Women learn early how to swallow what they feel, to swallow tears, anger, the fear of being rejected. I learned too early, and there I was again, swallowing it all, swallowing the emptiness of a marriage where I was talking to myself, where my presence made no difference, where my touch no longer triggered anything at all. I started avoiding going to bed early. I spent more time washing dishes, folding clothes, fixing things that didn't need fixing, anything to delay that silence waiting for me under the covers. Sometimes I'd lie down and pretend to be asleep, just so I wouldn't have to speak or listen. Elias didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he pretended just as well. I don't know. All I know is that I was growing lonelier, in the same house, in the same room, in the same bed. Some people think love ends with yelling, with drama. Mine ended in the sound of silverware on plates, in the zip of a backpack being closed, in the light being turned off without a good night. Love dies of boredom too, of absence, of silence, and ours was already dead. We just kept pretending it wasn't. The cruelest part was remembering who we used to be, how he looked at me in the beginning, the notes we used to leave each other, the afternoons where he made excuses just to see me, the first time he saw me in a blue dress and said he wanted to marry me. I still had that dress tucked away. It still fit, even with a different body. But his gaze, that no longer fit me at all. And it was in that cold silence that I started noticing something else changing inside me, still without a name, a diagnosis, or an explanation. But my body had begun sending signals: unusual fatigue, dizziness, a lingering pain deep in my chest that I still pretended was just sadness. I had no idea that this silence was hiding more than distance. It was hiding something that, soon enough, would change everything. It takes time to realize when love turns into judgment. At first, it's just stray comments, said with a smile or fake concern. "You don't wear those jeans I liked anymore." He said that while adjusting his tie. Without even looking at me, I stood there, towel in hand, feeling the words slip in like a sharp, silent knife. I didn't reply. I just swallowed hard and went back to wiping down the bathroom sink, pretending it didn't hurt. Then came the kind of question that sounds like advice, but drips with poison. "Why don't you go back to the gym?" He said it like he was suggesting a different TV channel. Not angry, not sarcastic, just cold. And that's what stings the most. When criticism comes wrapped in neutrality, like the problem is too small to deserve any real feeling. I gave a half smile and said I didn't have time lately, that the boys were keeping me busy. He shrugged, as if the body he'd once touched daily was now just a scheduling inconvenience. His words started piling up inside me like shards of glass, and every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a woman. I saw a mistake. A before and after, with no before good enough to justify the after. I started comparing my old clothes, my photos, my face. Everything seemed like less attractive, less interesting, less enough. And the worst part? I began to believe it. One Saturday night, I found a box of old photos, me and Elias at the beginning of our relationship. He held me by the waist like I was the center of his world. I remembered the first time he saw me dancing at a church party. He said my eyes sparkled like headlights, that he fell for that lightness in me. And now I felt heavy, not just in my body, but in all the words I didn't say, the silences I accepted, the pain I carried. It's a strange thing, feeling ashamed of your own body inside your own home. I started turning off the lights to change clothes, slept in oversized t-shirts, avoided sitting across from him, anything to avoid reminding myself that I was no longer the woman he looked at with desire. I was still a wife, a mother, a worker, but a woman, not in his eyes. The comments didn't stop, small, constant, like drops wearing down stone. Did you see that woman at my job? She really takes care of herself. The neighbor's daughter is on a diet, lost like 15 pounds. So-and-so runs every morning. Imagine that energy. I pretended not to hear, but I heard it all, and every phrase was a cruel reminder that I was falling behind, not just in body, but in a place that used to be mine. I started noticing him looking at other women, not in any dramatic way, but with a kind of attention he no longer gave me. On the street, in the grocery store, even on TV. A lingering gaze, a silly smile, sometimes a passing comment, and every time it happened, a piece of me died. Because it wasn't just about him looking, it was about him not seeing me anymore. I became a woman of silences, of excuses, of pulling back, quieter by the day, and he, more distant. He no longer asked if I wanted to go out, if I was tired, if I needed anything. It was like I was only there to keep the gears turning, house clean, meals cooked, kids cared for, the invisible woman, and even so, still being compared. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't need kisses, hotels, or hidden messages. It starts way before that, in the eyes that stop searching for you, in subtle comparisons, in transferred desire, in the suggestion that if you were different, maybe he'd still want you. That, to me, was the first betrayal, the cruelest, the one that made me start doubting myself. But in that box of photos, among all the memories of who we once were, I found a forgotten picture, me alone, holding our kids in my arms, with a tired but whole smile. And in that moment, I understood something Elias hadn't yet realized. The woman he compared, judged, and neglected was the same one holding up his entire world, without letting it fall, and that no one could ever diminish. The body speaks before we understand. It started with a strange fatigue that wouldn't go away, even after a full night's sleep. Then came the dizziness, the feeling of constantly being off balance. Some days, I had to hold on to the sink just to keep from falling while washing dishes, and still, I stayed silent. Because women learn early on that if they stop, everything collapses, and I couldn't collapse, not yet. I spent months convincing myself it was stress, just the weight of daily life. I made up 1,000 excuses, age, hormones, too many responsibilities. But deep down, there was a fear I didn't want to name, fear of discovering there was more, something I couldn't cover up with makeup or good intentions, something that would take away the little control I still felt I had over my own life. I decided to go to the doctor on an ordinary day, one of those when the world keeps spinning while everything inside you stands still. I took the bus alone, without telling anyone, not even Elias. I knew he wouldn't ask, and part of me preferred it that way. Carrying that tired body was already hard enough. Hearing an empty, obligatory response would have made it worse. In the office, the doctor listened carefully. He looked into my eyes like he was hearing more than just my words. He ordered a bunch of tests, and for the first time in a long while, I felt cared for, but also exposed. When the results came in, he called my name with that overly calm tone you learn to fear. I sat down across from him, and with just one look, I knew my life was about to change. The name of the illness came like a sentence. Cancer. The word echoed in the room, even in the silence. He explained everything, detailed the options, showed me the path forward. But all I could think was, how am I going to hide this from everyone? I didn't tell anyone. Not Elias, not my children, not out of shame, but to protect them. They already had their own worries, their routines, their absences. And me, I was used to carrying things alone. The truth is, I didn't trust that he could handle it. The man who couldn't even look at me with tenderness. How would he deal with my vulnerability? How would he care for me if he didn't even notice I was getting sick right in front of him? I kept living, with the illness like a secret folded into my pocket, tucked between electric bills and cake recipes. I went to appointments in secret, took medicine at odd hours. I learned to mask the pain with silence. The nausea, I blamed it on heavy food. The fatigue, I said it was work. My absences, I blamed traffic, errands, school runs, and no one suspected a thing. Not for a second. Because strong women do that, right? The more it hurts, the more they smile. Some days I cried alone in the bathroom, towel over my mouth so no one would hear. Other nights, I slept sitting on the couch so I wouldn't have to explain the tear-stained pillow. And still, I carried on. Woke up, cleaned the house, took the kids, made the meals, held up the world, except for myself. And through it all, he didn't notice. Not one question. Not a single, "Are you okay?" Nothing. There was a moment I looked at him sleeping and asked myself, if I disappeared today, would he even notice? Or would he only realize something was off when the coffee wasn't made, the clothes weren't ironed, the bills went unpaid? That question cut through me like a knife. Because the pain of being forgotten while still alive is crueler than any illness. I was there, bleeding inside. And he didn't see it. Didn't see it because he wasn't looking. Because he hadn't looked in a long time. The only thing keeping me going was a promise I made to myself. I will not die without becoming whole. I will not let my story end as a side character in my own life. And maybe, within that silence, imposed by a lukewarm marriage and a relentless illness, something new was being born. Still small, still fragile, but mine. I kept my secret carefully, not out of fear, but because I needed, above all, to remember who I was without anyone else telling me. Not my husband, not the doctor, not the neighbors, not the church, just me. And that, as painful as it was the beginning of finding myself again. I used to think that knowing hurt more than suspecting, but it doesn't. What truly tears you apart is the exact moment when doubt becomes certainty, when you see with your own eyes what your heart begged not to be true. That's how it happened with me. There was no lipstick-stained shirt, no unfamiliar perfume on his clothes. The betrayal came through another woman, a friend. It was a Monday afternoon. I was still in my work clothes, sitting on the couch with swollen feet, when my phone buzzed. It was Sonia, an old friend, the kind who understands your silences before your words. Her message was short. "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped instantly. I called her back without thinking. She answered with a trembling voice, and just by the way she breathed into the phone, I knew pain was coming. I saw Elias. He was with another woman. They were at that bar next to the gas station, and they weren't just talking. The words echoed like a muffled gunshot. I went silent. She tried to explain, said she didn't want to hurt me, that she'd hesitated to tell me, but she couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. I thanked her with a voice that barely came out, hung up, and sat there, frozen, holding the phone like time had stopped. My first reaction was denial. Maybe it was a mistake. A coincidence. Maybe she saw wrong. But deep inside, I already knew. I had known for a long time. I just didn't want to face it. Because when you admit you've been cheated on, it's not just love that collapses. It's your self-worth, your story, your ground. That night, Elias got home later than usual. Said he had something to finish at work. The same excuse as always. I watched every one of his movements, like I was studying a stranger. He walked in, opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, sat on the couch, turned on the TV, and I, right next to him, barely breathing, waiting for some sign of guilt. But he looked relaxed, too relaxed, and that hurt even more, because the coldness of someone who cheats is what cuts the deepest. I didn't confront him, not then. I was afraid of what would come next, afraid of hearing truths I couldn't handle, afraid of the mockery, the indifference, the ending. I chose silence. On the outside, I was the same. On the inside, something had died. In the days that followed, I started noticing the little things. How he took his phone everywhere now, even into the bathroom. How he left the house more often, always with vague excuses. The long showers before leaving and after coming home. The new cologne. The texts he deleted too quickly. It was all there, screaming. And still, he pretended everything was normal. And I pretended too. But what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the reason. I knew. It was my body, my exhaustion, my silence. He traded me for a younger woman, thinner, lighter, and that crushed me. Because even sick, even fighting every day just to get out of bed, I was still faithful, still present, still there, and he wasn't. It wasn't just the kiss he gave her. It was the comparison, the abandonment, the unspoken message. You're not enough anymore. And I, who had already been struggling to find myself again through all the pain, felt myself sinking all over again. Because being betrayed when you're already weak is like falling to the ground and getting kicked while you're down. I thought about telling the kids, about shouting it to the world, about confronting the other woman, but I didn't. I swallowed it. I chose to watch, stay quiet, breathe deep. Because sometimes, silence is more powerful than any outburst, and because I knew my time to speak would come. In a small town, everything becomes gossip, and soon enough, people started talking. The other woman wasn't a stranger. She was one of those women everyone knows by name, by body, by easy smiles. And I became the target of stares, pity, judgment, curiosity. I felt exposed, like my pain had become public entertainment. But there, at the bottom of the pit, where the ground had disappeared, I made a choice. I would endure, not for him, for me, because if he gave up on the woman who stood beside him for 20 years, he was the one losing, not me. In a small town, betrayal doesn't stay behind closed doors. It spreads. It seeps through sidewalks, whispers across church pews, and sits in the beauty salon chairs. Before you even realize it, your private life becomes grocery store gossip. I thought I could hide it, that keeping my posture, sticking to the routine, and forcing a smile would be enough. But no, they knew, all of them, even before I did. It didn't take long for me to hear her name, Claudia. Blonde, slim, nails always done, perfume that lingered. She wasn't a stranger. She was from town. Grew up there. Her kids went to school with mine. She'd even been to my house for kids' birthday parties. She once greeted me with fake kisses and empty smiles. And now, she was with my husband. The news spread like rot. Within a week, even people who'd never looked me in the eye knew. I saw it in their faces. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked at me with pity. And then there were those who used my pain to feel better about their own lives, like my suffering confirmed their happiness. The worst part wasn't the gossip. It was the heavy silence full of meaning. The murmurs that stopped when I walked into a room, watching my story being told by other mouths, twisted, exposed. The whole town seemed to know more about my life than I did. They looked at me as if I was to blame, as if gaining weight, getting older, or being sick somehow justified being cheated on. I felt the judgment coming from every direction, and that consumed me more than the betrayal itself, because it wasn't just Elias comparing me. It was everyone around me. I remember one morning when I went to the store. It took all my strength to leave the house. My face was puffy, my eyes tired, my soul in pieces. But we needed rice. I went in, grabbed a cart, and tried to move quickly through the aisles. That's when I heard two women whispering near the deli section. They say she doesn't take care of herself anymore. Well, he's a man. That cut through me. I turned around, left the cart right there, and walked out. In the car, I cried like a child. The worst part wasn't knowing he was with someone else. It was feeling ashamed because of it, like it was my fault, like I had failed at being enough. And that shame, silent and heavy, started eating me from the inside. Every outfit I wore felt wrong. Every step I took in public felt weighted. I became someone who walked hunched over, as if expecting stones. Claudia, on the other hand, seemed to shine. I saw her twice with him, always dressed up, laughing loudly, proud to be seen. And Elias looked like a different man. The same one who hadn't spoken to me in months now smiled, talked with his hands, made sure people saw them together. And being forgotten in public hurts more than being betrayed in silence. I started avoiding places. I stopped going to the salon, quit attending church, asked the kids to walk to school, anything to keep from being more exposed than I already was. But inside, something began to shift. Pain, when it gets too big, can't stay in your chest. It starts turning into something else, into anger, into clarity, into strength. One ordinary night, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a broken woman anymore. I saw a wounded one. Yes, but still standing, a survivor. The shame began to make room for something else, indignation. I had been cheated on, humiliated, exposed, but I was still here, still breathing, still holding myself up. And somehow, that gave me breath. The town didn't change. The stairs were still the same, but I started looking at myself differently. I began to understand that the problem was never my body, or my age, or the way I was. The problem was Elias. He chose to leave. He chose to cheat. He chose cowardice. And Claudia, she was just the result of the emptiness he had created. In that moment, I began writing a new story. I didn't know how it would end, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't be a spectator in my own life anymore. Because there's one thing this town never understood. A woman who endures humiliation and still rises is more than betrayed. She's indestructible. The first time I sat in that cold chair at the clinic, I just wanted someone to listen to me, not to the symptoms, to me. It wasn't just my body that hurt. It was the weight of being unseen, the silence at home, the feeling of slowly disappearing while the world kept spinning like I'd never existed. I wasn't expecting a miracle. I just wanted to be treated like someone who still mattered. Dr. Andre wasn't the kind of doctor who used sweet words, but there was something in the way he looked at me. He didn't talk much, but he didn't fill the silence with haste either. He waited. And in that space between questions, I felt like I could exist fully. For the first time in a long time, someone was actually listening. He started with the basics, tests, family history, daily routine, but slowly he went deeper. He asked how I was sleeping, if I was eating well, if anything outside my physical health was weighing on me. I hesitated, but he didn't look away. That's when, for the first time, I let a piece of the truth slip out. I said I'd been tired, that some days, just getting out of bed felt like a battle. He didn't respond with cliches, didn't try to cheer me up. He just nodded, like he was saying, I understand. And maybe that simple gesture was what started putting me back together, because he wasn't trying to fix me. He was saying, without words, you have the right to be tired, to feel weak, to not be okay. Over time, the appointments became a kind of refuge, not because we talked a lot, but because I didn't have to pretend there. He noticed things no one else did, the trembling hands, the teary eyes, the short breath on bad days. He saw it all without me having to say a word, and that, coming from a stranger, hurt and healed me at the same time, because it showed just how invisible I had become in my own home. Once, during a routine checkup, he asked about my boys. I talked about them with a glow in my eyes, told him about their grades, their drawings, their giggles when we ordered pizza on Saturdays. And suddenly, I found myself laughing. A small, fragile laugh, but real. He smiled too and said, you talk about them like someone who still has hope. I swallowed hard, because it was true. Even in pieces, something in me still believed, still wanted to live. Not for me, for them. That's when I realized Dr. Andre wasn't just a doctor. He was a mirror. A mirror reflecting back a version of me I had forgotten. A woman who was exhausted. Yes, but still alive, still capable, still whole. And that was more than any diagnosis. While Elias remained absent, slipping further into another life, the doctor listened. Even in the silences, even in the glances. He never crossed any lines, never gave signs of anything beyond professional care, but there was respect. And after so long being disrespected, that meant everything. One day, I came into the clinic more worn out than usual. I'd had a fever the night before, nearly fainted that morning. I walked in trembling, my body screaming, stop. He looked at me, stopped what he was doing, and said gently, you're not leaving here alone today. He gave me water, adjusted the lights, did the tests right there, calmly, treated me like something fragile, but not broken. And in that gesture, holding my arm with care, speaking softly, respecting my silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in ages. Safety. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was what comes before it. It was presence, care, humanity. And for someone who'd spent years living beside a man who treated her like an obligation, that meant everything. It reminded me that I was still a woman, still visible, still had a voice. I left those appointments with more than prescriptions. I left with little doses of strength, with parts of myself restored, with a will to keep going. And in a world where everything around me was trying to pull me under, that alone was a miracle. I didn't plan a speech, didn't rehearse in front of the mirror. I had no script, no phrases stored up for the perfect dramatic effect. I just knew my moment had come. After swallowing so many silences, after pretending to sleep through countless nights, after hiding more truths than any one person should carry, I had to speak. Not out of revenge, not even out of anger, but because if I kept quiet one more time, I feared I would disappear entirely. The house was quiet. The boys were asleep. The only sound came from the TV, some late show humming in the background, filling the silence without meaning. Elias was sprawled out on the couch, scrolling on his phone like the world was fine, like nothing in our lives had shifted, as if I were still the same woman he could walk past, step over, ignore without consequence. But I wasn't, not anymore. I stood in the doorway for several seconds, just watching him. He didn't look up. He didn't even sense me there. And in that moment, with an almost painful clarity, I saw the truth. I had become invisible to him. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. He didn't see me anymore. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, but sharp. We need to talk. That was all it took for him to pause, his thumb hovering mid-scroll, his body tensing. He clicked the TV off with a sigh, not even meeting my eyes yet, already bracing for a complaint about chores or bills, something domestic, something dismissible. But what I gave him instead was truth, raw, cold, undeniable. I know about the affair. The words came out clean, solid, like a weight finally lifted from my throat. He froze. His face lost color. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again like he was trying to find the right performance. But I didn't give him time. I didn't need denials or explanations. I continued, steady, looking him directly in the eye for the first time in what felt like years. I know you replaced me with someone thinner, someone who makes you feel young again, desired, alive. I let that sink in, let him wear the discomfort. But what you don't know is that I'm sick. His entire body stiffened, the arrogance, the detachment. It drained from him instantly. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. What do you mean sick? He asked, barely above a whisper. Cancer, I said. I found out months ago. I've been going to appointments, doing tests, taking medication, alone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged. He looked at me like I was a stranger, but for once, not in neglect. This time it was fear, real, human fear. He reached for me instinctively, clumsily, as if suddenly remembering I was real, that I bled. His hand brushed my arm and I stepped back. Not violently, not with anger, just enough to say, not anymore. You thought I gave up on myself, I continued. You thought I let myself go, that I stopped being the woman you wanted. I was fighting, every single day, fighting to stay alive, fighting to be here for our sons, fighting to hold myself together while you were out there, looking for someone easier to love. He was shaking his head, eyes wide, voice cracking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I cut in. You didn't know, because you never asked, because knowing would have required you to see me, to really look, and you haven't looked at me in years. He tried to speak, but nothing meaningful came out, just fragments, apologies without shape, regret that sounded more like fear of consequence than genuine sorrow. I stood there, steady. It surprised me how calm I was. No tears, no yelling, no begging for understanding or change. That version of me was gone, burned out in the nights I cried into my pillow, while he snored beside me like everything was fine. I don't want your guilt, I said. I don't want your pity or your loyalty out of obligation. I wanted you when we still had something worth saving. Now, I just want respect. He started crying, for real, this time. Not crocodile tears. Not performative sobs. He cried like someone who suddenly realized they were holding something precious and let it rot in their hands. Like someone mourning something they never bothered to nurture. But I didn't cry with him. My tears had dried up a long time ago. On the nights he turned his back to me in bed. On the mornings he left without a kiss. On the days he looked through me like I was furniture. I had already grieved this marriage. Now I was simply naming its death. I needed you, I said quietly. When my body started to break, when I was scared, when I felt myself fading, I needed my husband. And instead, I got silence. I got judgment. I got replaced. The room was still, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when everything is ruined, but the sky hasn't yet cleared. He reached again. Slower this time, but I didn't move. I let him feel the distance he'd created. I'll do better, he whispered. You should have, I replied. But now I'm not here to wait for better. I'm here to live. That night, I slept alone. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and finally, peacefully. For the first time in a long time, I didn't lie in bed wondering what I'd done wrong. I didn't replay our arguments. I didn't hate my body or question my worth. I stared at the ceiling and felt light, still sick, still exhausted, still unsure of what tomorrow would bring, but no longer invisible, no longer shrinking. That night, I wasn't someone's wife. I wasn't someone's leftover. I was a woman who had chosen herself, and that was the beginning of everything. The morning after the confrontation was unusually bright, the kind of morning where the sun pours through the windows like forgiveness, but there was no peace in the house, only the echo of everything that had finally been said. Elias didn't leave for work right away. He stayed in the kitchen, pacing, trying to be present in a space he had long abandoned. Every time he tried to speak, I gave him the same look. Not now, not yet. It was strange how after all that pain, I felt no urgency for resolution. I wasn't craving apologies anymore. I wasn't waiting for grand gestures or sudden transformation. I had no interest in hearing promises from a man who had failed me in my darkest hour. The part of me that once needed his love had gone quiet. Not out of revenge, but out of awakening. He followed me around the house for the next few days like a shadow that arrived too late. He started noticing things. The quiet flinch when I climbed stairs. The weight I'd lost. Not in pursuit of beauty, but through stress and illness. The stack of medical bills hidden in the drawer. And maybe for the first time in years, he really saw me. Not the woman he thought I should be, but the one who had been surviving in silence. One night, he came into our room and sat at the edge of the bed. I don't know how I missed it all, he said, voice low, tired. I was so caught up in everything else. I thought you were just angry with me. I didn't know you were fighting for your life. I didn't turn to face him. I just listened. It wasn't that I didn't care. I simply didn't have energy left to manage his guilt. You didn't want to know, I said. It was easier to believe I'd let myself go than to ask what was going on. You wanted simple answers, and I was complicated. He stayed quiet, and in that silence, I felt the weight of years pressing between us. All the moments we could have saved each other, but didn't. All the little cracks that widened into this chasm. He started trying, slowly, clumsily, but visibly. He cooked dinner one night, not well, but he tried. He cleaned the bathroom, asked if I needed help with medications, took the boys to school without me asking, sat beside me during a TV show I used to watch alone. But nothing he did could erase the months, years, of absence. His efforts were a kind of mourning, not for me, but for the version of himself he finally realized he'd lost. I didn't reject his presence, but I didn't invite it either. There's a kind of wall that builds itself inside you after too many letdowns. It doesn't scream, it just stands there, steady, silent, immovable. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was just protecting what was left of me. In the middle of all this, there was one constant, Dr. Andre. He remained exactly as he had been from the start. steady, quiet, respectful. I didn't tell him everything that had happened at home, but he saw the shift. He always did. During one checkup, he asked me how I was, and I answered honestly for the first time. Better, I said, not because things are fixed, just because I'm no longer pretending. He smiled softly, nodded, and didn't press for more, and that meant everything. He gave space instead of advice. He offered presence instead of pressure. As weeks passed, Elias began to realize that my silence wasn't a phase. It was a boundary. I wasn't angry. I was just done. And he, for the first time, started asking real questions about my diagnosis, about my pain, about my fears, and I answered them, not as a wife trying to save a marriage, but as a woman telling the truth of her life. One evening, he said, I left you when you needed me the most. I don't deserve to ask you to forgive me, but I want to try to make things right. I looked at him for a long time before answering. I don't hate you, Elias. I just don't trust you to take care of me anymore. That was the most honest thing I'd ever said to him. There was no yelling, no second explosion, just that slow, steady decline of something that had already been dying for years. It was grief without the funeral, a goodbye stretched out over silent mornings and polite dinners. We became two people who used to be in love, now sharing a roof like distant relatives. Meanwhile, the doctor's kindness remained a quiet presence in my life. He never crossed lines, never gave signals beyond compassion. But sometimes, that's the loudest kind of love, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't rush, doesn't make itself the center of the story, just shows up over and over again. The turning point came unexpectedly. I had a small health scare, nothing dangerous, but enough to shake me. I ended up at the clinic, and he stayed with me long after his shift ended, just sitting, not talking, just there. And in that stillness, I realized something. While Elias had finally shown up, it was too late. Not because people don't deserve second chances, but because I had already started a new life in my heart. One where my worth wasn't determined by who stayed or who strayed. One where my pain wasn't hidden behind forced smiles. One where I was whole, even in illness. When I got home that night, I sat on the porch alone. The stars were out, the house was quiet, and I finally felt the full weight of freedom. Not the kind that comes from walking away, but the kind that comes from knowing you could, and still choosing yourself. Elias came out to sit beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Everything had already been said. Some truths come too late. And when they do, they don't spark reunion. They spark release. The truth about endings is that they never arrive all at once. They don't come with slammed doors or final words. They unfold slowly, in quiet choices, in breaths taken alone, in mornings where you realize you no longer flinch when he touches your hand. And not because the hurt is gone, but because the need is. In the weeks that followed my health scare, the air in the house changed. Elias was still trying. He made breakfast some mornings, picked up groceries without being asked, tried to engage in small conversations at dinner. But his efforts, though sincere, felt like raindrops on a scorched field. Too late, too light, too few. One day he came to me with tears in his eyes and asked if there was still a chance for us. I took a long moment before answering. I think the part of me that loved you as a husband, she's already gone. It wasn't said with bitterness, just truth. A truth born from everything that had come before it. The betrayal, the abandonment, the illness, the silence, and the awakening. He didn't argue. Nodded, and that, in a strange way, was the first time he honored who I had become. The woman who no longer needed him to feel whole. We started sleeping in separate rooms after that. The boys asked questions. We answered with calm honesty. No scenes, no fighting. Just facts. They adjusted quicker than I expected. Kids are often more perceptive than we give them credit for. I think they saw the peace in me, and that was enough. Peace. That was the word that kept echoing inside me. It came in waves. In quiet mornings where I drank coffee alone on the porch. In walks to the clinic where I finally noticed the flowers blooming along the sidewalk. In deep breaths between medical appointments. In soft glances exchanged with the doctor who never once tried to fix me, only saw me. I didn't fall into his arms. There was no romantic crescendo. But one day, after a particularly difficult appointment, I sat across from him and said, I'm tired of pretending I don't feel anything. He didn't speak, just looked at me with that steady calm he always carried. I'm not ready for anything, but I know I feel something here, I said, touching my chest. And I know it's because of you. His eyes softened. You don't have to be ready, he replied. You just have to be honest, and you just were. We didn't kiss that day. We didn't even hold hands. But something shifted, quietly, gently, like spring thawing after a brutal winter. I began rebuilding, not the kind of rebuilding people post on social media with gym selfies or bold declarations. My rebuilding was soft, private. It looked like journaling in the mornings, like going to therapy without feeling ashamed, like calling my sister and crying without explaining why, like walking into church and sitting in the back row, just breathing. I changed the curtains in the living room, rearranged the furniture, not because I needed to redecorate, but because I needed to reframe the space I'd been shrinking in. And one day, without planning it, I opened the closet and pulled out the blue dress. Yes, that one. The one he used to love. The one I had buried behind oversized sweaters and neutral colors. I didn't put it on for him. I didn't put it on for anyone. I put it on for the woman I had been before everything. And when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see her exactly. I saw someone new, someone deeper, someone scarred, yes, but radiant in her own quiet way. Later that afternoon, the doctor saw me walking out of the clinic wearing that dress. He smiled, said nothing, but his eyes held something gentle, something safe. Elias moved out a few weeks later. There was no drama, just a conversation, a handshake, a long look that said, "I'm sorry," without words. I wished him peace, and I meant it. I had nothing left to give him, but I had no more hatred either. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself. The boy stayed with me most days. Our rhythm found its way. There were still hard moments, nights when fear gripped me, days when treatment left me weak. But I was no longer alone in it. I had a support system, a quiet network of people who didn't ask me to perform strength, but simply sat with me in my weakness. And as for love, it grew slowly, like ivy, not fire. Dr. Andre never rushed me, never pushed. He showed up. He called. He brought soup when I couldn't cook. He sat in waiting rooms during tests. He never tried to be a hero. He just refused to let me carry everything alone. Eventually, we kissed. One night, on the porch, under a sky that felt wide enough for new chances. It wasn't cinematic. It was tender, real. A kiss born from shared pain, mutual respect, and months of quiet presence. The kind of kiss that says, "I see you." And I believed him, because he had seen me when no one else did. Now, when I look in the mirror, I still see the woman with scars. I still see the lines, the softness, the weight of everything I carried. But I don't look away anymore. I stand taller. I speak softer, but more clearly. I trust my silence, and I protect my peace like it's sacred, because it is. He wanted a younger, thinner woman to feel alive. But in the middle of my illness, I found the man who looked at me and saw the whole woman I had always been. And finally, I saw her too. It started quietly, like most real things do. There were no fireworks, no sweeping declarations, no rush to define what we were, just time and space and tenderness that didn't demand to be acknowledged out loud. That was how Dr. Andre, as I finally started calling him, entered my life not just as a doctor, not just as the man who had seen me at my lowest, but as something else, something I had never experienced in its pure form, a partner. I used to think love had to be dramatic, that it lived in grand gestures and passionate arguments and make-up kisses. I thought attention had to be chased, affection earned, loyalty proven through pain. That's what I had learned after all. That's what the world around me mirrored. Women sacrificing, men drifting, silence swallowing the space where connection used to be. But Andre rewrote all of that just by being. It was in the way he held my hand, not when it was convenient, but when I was trembling, when the results were uncertain, when my strength had run dry. It was the way he looked at me, not with pity, not with obligation, but with reverence, as if the simple fact that I was still here, still breathing, still showing up, was worthy of admiration. He never tried to erase my past, never tried to outshine my pain. He asked about it sometimes, gently, not to dissect it, but to understand the shape of what I had survived. He didn't flinch when I told him about the nights I cried on the bathroom floor, about the humiliation, about the illness, about how long I had felt like I wasn't enough. And he never once said, "That's not true." He just looked at me with those steady, unwavering eyes and said, "No one should have to feel that alone." In his presence, I began to unfold, slowly, carefully, like a flower that had forgotten it was still capable of blooming. I let him see the parts of me that had been too tender, too bruised for anyone else, the anger, the guilt, the softness I had buried so deep under survival. I almost didn't recognize it anymore, and in return, he gave me something I didn't know I'd been craving all my life: emotional safety. He showed up. Every time. He brought groceries when I was too tired, sat with me through infusions. He learned which foods triggered my nausea, which days I needed silence instead of words, which moments required distraction, and which required his full, focused attention. One afternoon, I was feeling weak, the kind of weakness that settles in your bones, not just your muscles. I couldn't get out of bed. The house was quiet. The kids were at school. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the old fear creeping back, the one that whispered, "You're still alone." I sent him a text, just 2 words, "Bad day." 20 minutes later, he was at the door. He didn't bring flowers. He brought soup. He didn't ask what was wrong. He sat on the floor beside my bed, his back against the wall, and said, "You don't have to talk. I'm just here." That moment stayed with me, not because it was flashy, but because it was everything I never thought I deserved. Quiet care, undemanding presence, love that didn't ask me to be better or stronger or prettier. It just met me exactly where I was. As I healed, not just from the illness, but from the years that preceded it, I began to experience something unfamiliar, softness without fear. We'd cook together, slowly, without rushing. He liked jazz, I liked silence, so we found a rhythm, soup on the stove, music low, our hands brushing as we passed each other in the kitchen. There was laughter again, not the nervous kind, not the fake kind, but real laughter, from my belly, from his chest. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years. He touched me like I was made of something valuable, not fragile, not delicate, just rare. The first time I took off my shirt in front of him, I paused. I was still carrying the scars, physical and otherwise. My body had changed. My skin told stories I wasn't sure he'd want to hear. But he didn't look away. He traced one of the faint surgery marks with the back of his fingers and said, "This is beautiful. This is yours." And I believed him. Not because I had to, but because by then, I had started to believe it myself. That's what he gave me. Not validation, not compliments, but space to believe again. To believe in quiet mornings, in coffee shared without words, in long walks where nothing needed to be said, in love that held you upright without asking you to prove your worth first. Some nights we sat on the porch, my head resting against his shoulder, the boys playing inside. The world slowed down to just us and the hum of cicadas. And I'd think, so this is what it feels like. Not passion, not drama, but peace. The kind of love that heals without needing to fix. Sometimes I'd cry without warning. Grief doesn't keep a calendar. He never rushed me through those moments. He never tried to cheer me up. He just held my hand and let me feel whatever needed to be felt. And after, when the tears dried, he'd smile and say, "Still here." And that was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. Not, "I'll never hurt you." Not, "You're everything." Just, "Still here." Present, constant, unshaken. I had loved before, but I had never been loved like this. And now I knew the difference.